Hello there. What is going on, everyone? We're going to talk about Star Wars Legion and some vehicles that we'd love to see that would be really cool if they showed up in the game. And this is going to be a fun list. We're going to go over a couple of things. If you guys are new here to the channel, there's a new round of the giveaway going on for a $25 Amazon gift card. You just have to be a subscriber and leave a comment on this or one of my videos. It's as simple as that. We're going to start things off with the HMP gunship. I just feel like this is a great way to give the Separatists another type of transport. Again, there have been cases you can have guys potentially get on here, but at the same time, I don't know if it would have to function as a transport. It'd probably be more of like a helicopter gunship role, probably more of an attack vehicle, probably a high cost. These things are kind of big, but I don't think it's quite too big to get into the game. Especially in some of the art that shows it a little bit smaller, some depictions of it show them a little bit larger. I feel like there's definitely a way to do this, and a lot of times with aerial vehicles that if they're kind of on the fence whether or not they belong in the game, I think you can, especially if you have them mounted, you can get away with showing them a little smaller, a little bit on the smaller side to make it feasible to get them in the game, with the idea of, well, if they're above the ground, then maybe they're kind of smaller because maybe we're looking up and we see them and they're not going to be, in our faces. They're going to be a little bit higher above. So I feel like you can get a little abstract, just a little bit, with hovering helicopter type stuff. Now, I'm not saying we should necessarily have X-wings and Y-wings and B-wings and stuff like that in the game, although it could potentially be cool. But some stuff that kind of functions. Again, I don't think you need necessarily jet planes, but you need more helicopters, right? And I feel like the HMP gunship kind of functions in that type of role. And I think it'd be really cool. And you have the option to maybe have it function as a transport also. Maybe it'd be an option to just like slow it down to make it less combat effective, but also can function as a transport. But I think I'd rather use it more of in a pure gunship type of role. I think that could be really cool. On the Republic side of the house, I think the ATTE is going to be on the kind of the larger end of the spectrum on what's possible. I think it's one of the reasons it hasn't shown up yet. But again, this one is depicted several different ways. But in usually all depictions, it ends up being very, very large. If they did the ATTE, though, it'd be a lot of really cool options for it. They could, there was plenty of these in the Clone Wars, but this also showed up in Star Wars Rebels with the old clones living on it. Although that was a very different version, it'd be fun to see if they did, like if they offered enough kit pieces for you to kind of make either one, or if they just make the Republic version. If there's a way to maybe just encourage the community to kind of dress these up as the sort of hodgepodge ragtag version of the old clones that were using it in Star Wars Rebels. But this one would be a really fun one, and I'd love to see it. I'd love to see bigger stuff. And again, maybe we're going to see bigger stuff, depending on how the game might have some pretty interesting news at Mini Stravaganza. One of the things that I've speculated is that they may be bringing some pretty big changes to some of the fundamentals of the game, leading it more towards larger scale warfare, and to help separate it from Shatterpoint and Shatterpoint's smaller scale warfare. And I think one way you do that is by opening doors that can lead to larger vehicles. That's kind of one of those thoughts. Not particularly a very large vehicle, but maybe the Hailfire droid. I think this is one that people have really wanted for a while. I don't know if the Separatists are going to get too much in that regard, because I know they are getting the crabs pretty soon. So, but I think there's room for the Hailfire droid. It's fast moving. It's something that you wouldn't see in small scale battles, but could definitely work in larger scale battles. It's got a lot of terrain to traverse. It's launching artillery kind of long range. It could be multifunctional, and it could be pretty cool. Wouldn't mind seeing that show up. It's also pretty iconic. These guys rushing forward in the Battle of Geonosis was pretty iconic, and I thought it was a good one. Moving forward, I don't know if this one crosses into the realm of mounted commanders, which is something I'd love to see. Love to see more mounted characters in the future, but I like Grievous's motorcycle. I always thought this was a cool one, and it'd be like, since they're resculpting Grievous, I'm like, wouldn't it be cool? Again, I think there's assumptions that they're coming out with new starters. I think that's the clear winner for as far as the guest category. But if I had to wager an alternate guess, maybe we'll get a Grievous pack. And maybe it'll be like, you can have Grievous mounted or unmounted. And if he's mounted, he looks like this. If he's unmounted, he looks like the new sculpt. So, like, again, that would be a really fun thing to be able to do. But it wagers, and it kind of crosses into this whole mounted commanders or mounted characters discussion, which I think is a whole different video. But I wanted to include this one because it kind of fits both things, because it would be a vehicle, whereas other mounted characters are riding living things, and that definitely happens an awful lot. But I'd like to see, I'd love to be able to mount and dismount if you're riding like the dewback riders. Well, it'd be really cool if they could get off and just be like, all right, my dewback's taking some damage. I'm going to walk around as a stormtrooper now. It could be pretty cool. It might complicate things a little bit, though, right? It possibly could. I don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze in that regard, but I think it'd be fun. I wouldn't mind exploring it. Ewoks. I was talking about Ewoks recently, and while they're not my favorite battle force, I do think that they should definitely have gliders. I think that's and there's been so many. I've seen speculative kind of ideas on how they could work. Maybe they start on a certain altitude and then they can only go lower, or stay the same or go lower. And then they may eventually land, and then maybe the Ewok gets off. That's an idea. There's a lot of fun ideas with the Ewok gliders, but have their altitude be restricted by their starting point is an option, although that could really restrict gameplay. So maybe you have to start they launched from off the map and then they're just flying around, but maybe they have a height restriction. Like maybe they can't go past height 2. Maybe they're height 1 the whole time, and they can't go past height 2. Maybe there's something like that, or maybe they can never increase their height, or something to that effect. But still, Ewoks are going to have a hard time getting a lot of newer stuff, because Ewoks usually aren't featured in a lot of Star Wars media. So if you're trying to get stuff from the Return of the Jedi, if you're ever wanting to add to existing battle forces, you kind of have to use everything that's in Return of the Jedi. And this is one of those options that seems like a genuine fit if you're looking to add to existing battle forces, like the Bright Tree Village battle force. So, pretty cool. And while not necessarily a vehicle, it still works. Oh, I guess it technically is. But I gotta wonder if those Scorpionics are actually technically vehicles. I've gotta wonder. These things are awesome. They're from the Book of Boba Fett. Speaking of adding to battle forces, this is a great way to add to battle forces. I mean, who wouldn't want to add to the Shadow Collective? I mean, these guys are perfect. The fact that you can run 2 heavies, and there were 2 of them in the episode, also perfect. Chef's kiss. They could be a little strong, though, but they were taken down, so maybe not too strong. I think these would be just magnificent. They seem like a perfect fit for Shadow Collective, since they were the Pikes kind of brought them there. Pikes were doing bad things. Pikes were doing Pike things. I don't think we need to get a whole Pike-specific sub-faction, but you could potentially make also a separate Pike commander that can work in Shadow Collective that gives these guys a bonus, and make things work in that regard, so you are more incentivized to run Pikes, but you don't have to run exclusively Pikes. So there's some definite options there, which would be cool. And I think I can't forget the Lat gunships. Look, the Lats. We got the Lat Eye for the Empire and the Republic. So I don't think this one was initially intended to actually make it to the game. Again, it is a little bit on the larger side. I don't think it's too large for Legion. I don't think it is, but it kind of is on that fence. So there's a couple of options. Maybe you do a slightly smaller version of it, kind of like with the HMP gunship, right? Maybe you do a slightly smaller version of it and have it, appear in the sky, so it's a little bit farther up. It could be a full unit transport, like the Lada Eye, but it could be a little bit more gunship focused, or maybe it could be reconfigured in multiple ways. It's hard to look at a ship like this and say it's so iconic and really should, there's no other game. I mean, yes, they have them in X-Wing, and presumably if we ever get more Armada stuff, they would be very high up on the list to add new things to the Clone Wars. But there's a few other games that are going to do them justice, like Legion could. And, the only real drawback is the fact that they're a little too large to be with the norm for vehicles. So shrink it down, maybe 15%, and just have it be a little abstract. That's what I would say. Or do it at full size too. I mean, I'm okay with that also. But yeah, stuff like that is really fun, and I'd like to have it be fun, and I'd like to be able to have fun stuff in cool games, and that'd be really cool. I want to jump forward to Empire a little bit, specifically because when we're talking about faction direction and faction balance, one of the things Will Schick was talking about in that discussion, and I should probably talk more about that in the future, because I think we'll see some of that possibly at Mini Stravaganza, which is going to be coming up in July. But you're talking about the Empire having a vehicular focus, and so I wanted to throw out a couple of Imperial vehicles that could show up. We had that troop transport in The Mandalorian that was kind of a direct pull from, well, for one, it was from first seen in Star Wars Rebels, at least seen in current canon, but initially first seen as a toy that was kind of doubled as a vehicle that can transport stormtroopers, but also as a sort of a carrying case. And it's one of those times where, Kenner was given a lot of flexibility to just be like, hey, we want to make some more Star Wars toys. All right, we're going to just go ahead and make some more Star Wars toys. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. This is the stuff that was just off screen, And I love how they've kind of taken a lot of that stuff and run with it. And this was one that really would work very well for Star Wars Legion. Work perfectly as a transport. Maybe a more lightly armored or lightly weaponized. I think this thing had just had one simple gun on it. It would be kind of like in the way the AA5 functions for Rebels and Shadow Collective. It would kind of fill a little bit of that role, but maybe less with the whole having the medic and some of the crazy options that Rebels have with the AA5. You could do this one to be more of a cheaper vehicle that is maybe lightly armored. Maybe give it like Armor 2 or something like that. And put those stormtroopers in there, and probably have to make it closed to transport, even though technically it's a little open at the top. It's not open enough that they can shoot out of. So that's some of my thoughts on doing something like this, but I'd love to hear some of your thoughts as well. We also, of course, have the heavily featured in Star Wars Rebels and other Star Wars media. This thing even made it into Imperial Assault, the ATDP. Make a good interim ATST. Doesn't have to be as big and bad as the ATST. Doesn't have as much firepower as the ATST, but also could be significantly cheaper than the ATST. I think this would be a great one to show up. I think it's nowadays it's iconic enough to definitely be at home on the battlefield, and would definitely work with Star Wars Legion. I think this one's an obvious one that should definitely show up. And then we also have another version of that ATDP that had that arc reactor. This was a one-off. This was like a prototype. And so this one, I think it definitely could work, though. I think it could definitely work in Legion. This one was from this Mandalorian arc that Sabine Wren had designed, this prototype weapon that they built onto an ATDP model that could fry Beskar. And so it might get a bonus. And you could make it a thematic bonus that gets like it gains surge to crit and maybe marksman and some other and critical one and a free reroll or something like that if it's attacking, or gains a free aim token, or maybe 2 free aim tokens if it's attacking a Mandalorian unit. But maybe you keep it relatively lower range. It might be only like a range 1 or 2, for that main gun. And so like there's definitely some ways to do it. You could make it devastating towards Mandalorians and just kind of so for everybody else. Things like that happen. You don't want to have like too hard a counter against one unit. You want it to be more of a thematic counter, like when somebody has Jedi Hunter, like like it's not like a super hard counter, but it's a nice bonus against them. It'd be nice if this had something like that against Mandalorians. But also it looks cool. It's a little different. We don't see that many different Legion capable ground vehicles. Speaking of Legion capable ground vehicles. Let's talk about one that's not really Legion capable at all, but I really wish were, and it's the AT-AT. Of course, I've got to include this in a vehicle video such as this, but look, the AT-ATs or the AT-ATs are, of course, the very first thing I ever thought of when Legion was very first announced, before we even had the full scale and how big it was going to be and what was going to be feasible and what wasn't. But the AT-ATs really, I'd love to have them on my tabletop. I'd love to be able to play them, even if they're not competitive. Like, maybe price point them a little too high so that they're not dominating the the tournament scenario. It's the same thing with the Super Star Destroyer in Star Wars Armada. It's not dominating tournaments. It's not. Some of them can do well, but it's not dominating tournaments. The Starhawk is maybe, on the other hand, or doing extremely well. But the Super Star Destroyer it has a place. It's not hyper competitive. It can do well, and it's fun. It's fun to run a big nasty thing, and I'd love to run big nasty things in Legion. And especially, granted, I've asked for this forever, and I don't think I ever had a serious shot of getting it. But if my predictions about them scaling up the scope a little bit more in Legion to make it more about the big army versus big army, this would definitely be the time if they do that. Because again, my takeaway was they're trying to distinguish Legion from Shatterpoint more so than it is already. I think if you play both games, you are well aware of the differences between the two games. However, there are some similarities as well, especially with certain lists. If you run like a small list in Legion, you can actually have similar it can seem more similar in scope to what Shatterpoint is, especially if you're running maybe just a 500-point game and you're running it on a 3x3 and you can use the exact same terrain and you might have a similar model count, depending on what you're running. It's definitely feasible that you could have similar looking lists on a similar size play field using the exact same play mat, the exact same terrain, and a lot of that. So I think if they're trying to push these two games a little bit farther apart, I get the feeling, and there'd never be a better time to get these guys in here than when they're trying to make Legion feel more big battle, big army versus as opposed to single crew versus single crew. So maybe they're just gonna go full blown. Let's turn it up to 11 and make the AT-AT for Star Wars Legion. I don't really expect that, but I would be very impressed if they made it happen. And again, if they do, I hope it's not dominating tournaments, but I hope it's fun. Even if it's something you can only use for like casual play. Maybe you couldn't even bring it in tournaments, but it was still legal for casual play. I'd still run it. I'd have a lot of fun with it. And, but then again, if it's not legal at all in tournament play, then that might mean that it's totally broken and it might not be fun. So I'd still like for it to be balanced enough for competitive play. And maybe balanced a little under so where it's like maybe slightly not competitive, because I don't want these things to run wild and everybody to feel like they have to run them. Then that's more for me. Maybe I'll run two. Maybe I'll run 2 or 3. I don't even think that's possible. But either way, it'd be really, really fun to get big, nasty stuff in Star Wars Legion. I want to hear you guys' thoughts. Let me know down in the comments section. That's going to do it for today's video. I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you later. May the Force be with you. Live long and prosper. Be excellent to each other. Party on, dudes. So say we all. The spice must flow. And always wash your socks.